Let's bring in one of our guests now, because I'm delighted to be joined by the Labour MP for East Ham since 1994, former Chief Secretary to the Treasury under Tony Blair. Sir Stephen Timms joins me. Lovely to see you this morning, Stephen. Let's get straight into some of the debates in today's paper about immigration. Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, basically accusing Keir Starmer of conspiring with those trying to stop the government from stopping illegal immigration, making a reference to that flight that he campaigned to not take off, that Jamaica flight. One of the people on the flight went on to commit a crime against somebody in the UK. Is Keir Starmer facilitating the retention of rapists and murderers in this country?
No. I mean, Suella Braverman is right that her plans aren't working, but that's because they were very bad plans. They've been badly thought through. They conflict with the law in various respects, and therefore they're not working. I mean, it's understandable she's trying to find someone else to blame, but the responsibility is in fact entirely hers.
But isn't the Labour Party on the side of those lawyers, as Braverman suggests? We've got a Labour councillor who is somebody that campaigns to try and keep people in the country who perhaps don't have the right to claim asylum here. So isn't Labour on the side of those so-called lefty lawyers that are trying to thwart the government's plans?
No, this is entirely the Home Secretary trying to find someone else to blame for her own failures. She needs to take responsibility. She's right, her policies are not working. She needs to fix the policies, not just blame somebody else.
And what's Labour's solution then? Because presumably if you think that it's wrong that Suella Braverman's plans are being thwarted by anyone, that by consequence means that you're quite happy to have quite robust policies to stop the boats, to stop people claiming asylum here that don't deserve to claim asylum.
Yeah, we do need to stop the boats. That's absolutely right. And the government needs to come up with a plan that will succeed, unlike the plans they've put in place so far, which are not working.
But how would you deter people, Sir Stephen?
Is now accepting. We need to do that by having a better relationship with France in particular, and negotiate proper restrictions and controls at the French end.
Yeah.
We also do need to make sure that it is legally possible for people who are entitled to claim asylum in the UK to come here, other than coming by a boat across the channel. At the moment, there's no legal means for them to do it. So, for example, if there's a child, perhaps from Africa, who's in France, who is legally entitled to come and join their sibling, their brother or their sister, who's got asylum status in the UK, there's no way for them to do that. There need to be some routes. The government has said they will introduce some legal routes. They haven't done that yet. Until there are, people are going to carry on desperately trying to get across the channel in these terrible small boats. That needs to be fixed.
There may be an argument that we've paid millions to the French and indeed that there are already legal routes in play. But let's move on to net zero now, because that's also a theme of today's newspapers. One of my panellists on the People's panel there wanted me to ask you about Just Stop Oil. We've seen Greenpeace scaling the Prime Minister's home in Richmond in the north. We've got Just Stop Oil now threatening to completely disrupt all of the football fixtures just about starting in the Premier League this weekend. Surely now it's time for Labour to break ties with Just Stop Oil, to not take Dale Vince's money, because these people are wreaking havoc and bringing misery to thousands of sports fans.
Well, I think it is pretty extraordinary that Greenpeace was able to walk into the Prime Minister's home and scale the roof. That was a very serious security lapse. That should not have happened. But Greenpeace does have a point in the arguments that it's making. I do not support the tactics of Just Stop Oil, but they also have a point in the case that they are arguing. And the Prime Minister's announcement that we're just going to have an extra 100 licences for more oil and gas prospecting in the North Sea is the wrong decision. We do need, with the rest of the world, to tackle the climate crisis. And what he's done is going absolutely in the wrong direction and giving up what has until now been quite an impressive UK lead on this area, from the COP conference in Glasgow and so on. Rishi Sunak, I think in a sort of measure of panic, seems to have thrown all that away in the hope that he can get a few votes going in the opposite direction.
But you were the Chief Secretary to the Treasury under Tony Blair. I'm wondering whether you think it is a good idea for Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves to announce £28 billion in spending on a green prosperity pledge when we found out this week that household debt is at £2 trillion. It's £71,000 per household. So surely a next Labour government, if that's going to happen, is going to be spending money, cashing cheques that it simply can't afford.
Well, that's what we saw with the Kwasi budget, which I'm sure you're going to ask Kwasi about in a minute, when he announced huge tax cuts and no means to pay for them. But I think actually Rachel Reeves has been absolutely right throughout all of this debate. And in particular, she's right to insist that everything a Labour government will do has to be built on the rock of fiscal responsibility.
Well, 28 billion spending a year isn't fiscally responsible, is it?
No, it definitely is. The plan is highly fiscally responsible. Of course, the government will continue to invest, and that's always happens and needs to happen. And at the moment, we do have to rebuild the economy after this terrible, stagnant lack of growth that we're in at the moment. So we've got to invest. We've got to rebuild the British economy, but it's got to be on the basis of fiscal responsibility, and that is the watchword of everything that Rachel Reeves has been saying over the last couple of years, and I very much agree with her.
Why did she have to water down the plans then? She looked at the plans and then she realised that she couldn't afford them. So that's not fiscally responsible, that's fiscally illiterate, isn't it?
No, that is fiscally responsible. That's why she said it's got to be phased in a fiscally responsible way, and she's absolutely right to do that.
Mr Timms, if you don't mind me asking, just because it might still be on the public's conscience that obviously you had this terrible thing happen to you in 2010 where you were stabbed by one of your constituents, Roshonara Choudhry. She's in prison now, and I just was researching this interview and I thought it was really interesting from your perspective as a Christian that you wanted to reach out to her. She obviously nearly killed you, but you said that you wanted to meet her in prison and perhaps discuss the case. Did you ever make contact with her personally?
Well, I have been in a restorative justice process. Unfortunately, it seems to have stalled. I don't know why. It's got stuck in red tape somewhere, and it doesn't seem to be moving forward at the moment. But I'm still hoping that somebody in the Ministry of Justice might finally, get things moving, and it might be possible, but it hasn't been yet. So
explain that to me, Mr Timms. You've wanted to reach out to this prisoner and try and have a conversation with her to try and get some closure, but the MOJ have stood in the way. Would you be willing to go and see her in prison then?
Yeah, we've been talking about that, and I understood that things were moving in that direction, but it's stalled for reasons that I don't understand. She actually wrote to me. She sent me 3 letters, so that was sort of how this began, and I'm very happy to go into a process which I thought was going to lead to the possibility of a meeting, but it hasn't, and I'm not sure what's happening now.
Have you been able to forgive her?
Well, I think if I met her, that may well be possible, but without some sort of communication, I don't think that would really mean anything.
OK, so Stephen Timms, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning.